and good morning once more. My name is John. I belong to the illustration brand TuneStop, a small-time brand dedicated to character design and business and discipline insights for the independent creative. We went over this housekeeping item already, and today we're going to be talking about my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ on a volunteer basis after the panel for anybody willing. Our immediate topic is going to be how to be a successful artist, because not everybody understands what they mean when they say that. We think about success and we may not even have an appropriate definition in our minds what that's supposed to look like for us as artists. The dictionary definition of success just on its own is the accomplishment of an aim or purpose. So our specific aim is to be a successful artist. We want to accomplish an aim or purpose within the scope of an artistic discipline. So our first question is, what is the aim or purpose you wish to accomplish as an artist? Now, art is a broad discipline, and incidentally, so is music. I bring up music for a reason. If you think about your favorite bands, you think about your favorite performers, you can think about people who play just one instrument and they make a whole career off of that. Slash from Guns N' Roses, for example, I bring him up because when my hair is long, I look kind of like him. We know him for his guitar skills, but he's not the whole band. Successful musicians don't have to be good at every single instrument. Being good, or rather great, at a single instrument is enough to create an entire career as a musician. So that means you as the artist need to choose your instrument and learn what you need to do to become great with that. You need to think of one thing you want to do as an artist. You want to focus. You want to narrow it down enough for it to make sense and develop an appropriate definition of success. Now, thinking of the one thing and focusing doesn't mean that you're going to limit yourself from trying things, but that does mean you're going to focus on one thing long enough to achieve your definition of success. Inside the visual arts, for example, that's where I come from, so that's where I have the best set of examples and definitions. The visual arts includes concept art, 3D art, illustration, comic art, animation, painting, and graphic design. And inside all these broad categories, there's still niches. There's still genres inside each of them. There's still specific purposes that each of these broad categorical selections can be dedicated to. So one option for you might be to learn the niches under your discipline or any needs or question that's not being answered inside the niche you're working in right now. Now, once you've selected a niche, it's time to set clear goals. You cannot be a successful artist without clear goals. We have to ask ourselves questions to become successful artists. The common metrics or elements of success when it comes to being a successful artist: asking ourselves whether we want to make a living, achieve mastery, communicate a message, develop a respectable body of work, gain notoriety in our discipline, and whether you work for yourself or someone else. And that's in no particular order in this case. These aren't necessarily a hierarchy. Some of these questions do have to be answered before others, but they all take a little bit of time to answer one at a time. The first one I want to talk about is achieving mastery, which is the secret ingredient to most creative pursuits. It's a worthy goal all on its own, being the best simply to be the best. And it's going to be necessary in some measure, no matter what your metric of success is, no matter how you answer all the rest of these questions about what it means to be a successful artist. Unless you're creating strictly for yourself and nobody else, which is good and valid. It's not a bad thing. That's why we ask ourselves whether we want to bother with achieving mastery, because that's going to have a bearing on how we want to approach the rest of our questions. Knowing how good you want to become helps design a route between where you are now with your current skills and where you need to be to create the kind of art you want. Examples exist of mastery of nearly every creative craft, and having that goalpost, having one specific artist in mind who reflects what you want to create, helps you develop your roadmap. You need to have at least one concrete example of the kind of art you're trying to create in order to effectively use the metric of mastery. Again, if you have at least one concrete example, you have a roadmap to your desired level of mastery. Most people with high levels of mastery are willing to share at least a little bit about their creative journey, a little bit about how they achieved their mastery, how much time it took, their resources they needed, where they went for education, you can gain the answers next to simply doing the work. Next, we're going to talk about making a living. Whether you want to make a living or not when it comes to your art. Do you want your art to provide for you? And saying no to this question is valid. Money doesn't have to be involved in everything that we do. There is a certain extent to which it can actually corrupt our creative pursuits. If you do wish to make a living from your art, however, your art needs to be worth more than somebody else's money. That's not as hard as it sounds, I promise. The vendor's hall down that way is proof of that. Everybody can make something worth more than somebody else's money, even if it's just a little bit. Now, if you want a corporation's money, you need an incredible level of mastery. You need to solve money-making problems for that corporation, and you'll have to possess an incredible degree of skill that the company stands in need of. That's usually lined out in a job description, so you still have a roadmap if you want a corporation's money to make a living. It's not the only way. Direct-to-consumer is viable and only becomes more and more viable every single day. Again, the vendor's hall is proof of this, as well as all the platforms that are available online for getting money from people and giving them something cool in exchange. We talk a lot about operating a Patreon, operating a subscription service, operating even simply an online shop that gives information that we have in exchange for money, or offering comics, offering any kind of digital or physical good, really. You can sell directly to the consumer. You do still need skill, but you're only going to need about 1,000 customers willing to spend $100 a year on you if you want to make a living with direct-to-consumer. 1,000 customers buy $100 a year. That's 100,000, right? There we go. 1,000 people spending $100 a year on you is $100,000, and that's pretty comfortable for most people. Financial success as an artist is not always going to be a glamorous thing, but it's still viable and realistic. It's viable and realistic for people who are willing to do work and create cool things and put in the effort required both to manufacture the cool thing and sell the cool thing. Our next metric of success is the matter of communicating a message. Messages supercharge your art with the power of personal resonance. Now, you can draw things that don't mean anything, and that's perfectly fine. But when you have something in your pictures, when you have comics, when you have stories, you're putting things inside that connect with the person reading it. I have an art book at my table, for example. The middle section of it is an Ask blog, posts and questions from it, and that's where people seem to spend a lot of time because there was a story there, there was humor, there was a character they could connect to. That's what message is, a story, a character, that human connection. You have to decide how important message is in your own personal metric of success. And you also need to do enough work to cause your people to remember your message. Draw enough pictures communicating a certain ideal. Draw enough comics to get people to connect with the character and care about them and want to see what happens next. Now, some artists place their craft entirely under the service of message. That's not a wrong thing. When you look in the newspaper, the examples in the newspaper comics are not all high levels of art, but they are clever writers, and their art is in service of the joke or in service of the story, and people make decent, long-standing careers out of that. And there's still some people who are able to do that direct-to-consumer by the way of the webcomic route. Good ideas contribute to your culture, and art is a valid way to contribute those good ideas and connect to an audience and build out success. Now, in choosing message as your success metric, you need to understand clearly the relationship between your message and the level of mastery required to serve that message. Again, going back to the example of comic strips, you have to have reasonably clear art, but not necessarily superbly high master level finish when it comes to that work. The story is a little bit different if you're drawing for DC or Marvel, or telling a story with that kind of gravity. The similar rules apply when it comes to manga also, and I don't know why I didn't bring that example out first. You have to forgive me for that. But you can see a broad spectrum of mastery of art, as well as a broad spectrum of message and connection with that art. And a more serious message may need more serious pictures, or a more humorous message may need less humorous pictures. Or you have a humorous message and serious pictures because serious makes things funny in the right spot. Comics are that common manifestation of the power of pictures in cooperation with the message. They cause us to stop, read, and process in order to consume the work. That's already a hard requirement of if you have a comic, somebody's going to stop and pay attention to it, and you're going to have a little bit more gravity that way. Now, if you choose to forego the question of message, remember that message and art are impossible to completely divorce. And your requirement for technical mastery is going to go up the more you choose to move away from some kind of message in your work in order to make an impact. The next element we're going to deal with is the respectful body of work, which applies to any level of success, whether you want to make a living, build mastery, communicate a message. There's a story of two potters, or two classes of potters. There's various versions of this story. The one potter was instructed to make the most perfect pot they could make, and another potter was instructed to make as many pots as they could make. And the person who made the higher number of pots ended up at a higher level of mastery than the person who was instructed to make one perfect pot. The moral there being that the more art you make, the more naturally you will do well in whatever your other defined metrics of success are. How much art does it take to be successful? How many comics do you have to draw? How many paintings do you have to make? Enough to achieve mastery. Enough to have enough art to sell and make the money you want to make. Enough art to get the attention of the right person. Enough art to communicate the message that you want people to hear. Any success metric you choose is going to require more art, not less. If you go to read a comic and you're fascinated by it, you want more issues, you want more pages, you want more strips. You want to connect with that character, you want to connect with the characters, you want to connect with the world and understand, hey, what's going on here? What's going to happen next? When we see a great painter building out a world inside that illustration, we don't just want the one painting, although the one painting is usually pretty cool if they're that bad of a dude. You want more paintings. You want to see more of the way they see the world. You want to see more of the way they see people. The more work you have, the higher chances you have of success in any of the other metrics, whether that's the money, the message, the investment, all of it. You must create, and you must create a lot. If you only want to create a little as a hobby, that's valid too. But more work is necessary for most of the other metrics of success in our consideration. Next, we talk about notoriety in your field. Does success to you mean that your art is going to be instantly recognized? Do you want people to look at a picture and say, that belongs to Bill Watterson? Calvin and Hobbes. Classic example of pretty easy to pick up on. Now, being instantly recognized doesn't have to be your metric of success. Self-gratification, again, is a fine and valid objective of your art, but beyond the hobbyist level, you want to be recognized. You want people to be able to pick you out of a crowd and see the way you do color, the way you do lines, the way you do people, and be able to say, that's work. I love his work. I want to see more of that. You need to have at least a little bit of notoriety in order to meet the other levels of success. How much notoriety? How instantly recognized you want to be? Determine that for yourself. There's a spectrum. It's all on a spectrum. These questions all have a relationship to each other. Post things people remember. Try to make an impact. Try to tell a good story. Tell a good joke. Draw a picture that grips the viewer's eyeballs and doesn't let them go. Post the work often enough that you're going to be remembered. If you post once and that's that, there's a low likelihood that your name is going to come down through the generations and stick around. Post frequently enough that you are remembered. We have to remember the relationship between quantity as well as consistency. Appear once a week, appear once every 2 weeks, appear once a month, appear often enough and with enough work that people just don't forget you. And do this long enough to attract the attention of the right people. Comic strips and broadcast television have this easy because they have really well-developed production pipelines that enable people to show up once a week, or in the case of print media, once a day. And that goes a long way to making sure that the artists and the creative people are not forgotten. Every artist that possesses the notoriety that you want may not have had the power of syndicated television or syndicated print media. They most likely earned it with time, effort, and study. And it took a while. Years in some cases. The lesson there is that it may take you a while too, and that's okay. There's a time cost. There's a hard time cost to gain all of these things because we don't have the power of Hollywood. We don't have the power of NBC. We don't have the power of USA Today. And you don't have to, as long as you're willing to put enough effort and have focus on what your message is and what you want to tell people and how you're going to tell it. Next question, who do you work for? Do you work for yourself or do you work for somebody else? Now, office jobs for artists do exist. They exist remotely, they exist in-house, but they're still few and far between. And they're incredibly discriminate in their skill requirement. The people who are able to give office jobs for artists usually have a lot of money and high-dollar properties, and they don't want to give those jobs away unless you can prove that you're able to make them millions of dollars by way of your contributions. And they're commonly geographically restricted. Again, remote work exists. The ability to create in one part of the world and send that off to another, that's still available. But there's still some geographic restriction. A lot of game creators exist in, I think, Toronto and LA, for example. And that's where people had to geographically congregate for a long time, and to some extent they still do. And these jobs are actively being fought for by other people who are also qualified for those seats. Now granted, much like a regular 9-to-5 in any other discipline, an office job as an artist is a little more mentally secure, a little easier to process idea-wise because you're receiving assignments and completing them and passing them back. But again, they're scarce and they're subject to someone else's rules. You might not be as comfortable sanitizing your message for the sake of submitting it into a corporate machine and having it published that way. There may be a little bit of dilution that's happening as a result of coming under that authority. There's benefits, but there's costs for these corporate jobs. Often with the initial high cost, again, of incredible mastery that stands out above millions of other people who want that work. In mind of that, you can be your own boss. It's not necessarily easier or harder in comparison to going and being part of a corporate machine and having someone looking out for you that way. You are going to have more administrative responsibility as a consequence of working for yourself. You're going to have more marketing responsibility as a consequence of working for yourself. You have to do your own bills. You have to do your own production scheduling. You have to actually produce according to that schedule and have work to present 3 times a week, even, in the case of some of the best webcomic publishers that I know. But being your own boss can be a little bit richer because you're not sharing that money with the overhead of an organization. It might be a little less stable because you're basically running on the goodwill of the people who are reading your work or buying your work, but it's a little bit more free also. You can be truer to your message. You can be truer to what's important to you. You can have more integrity in the kind of things you believe in and how your work reflects that. Self-employed artists of all kinds do exist. And you can find a self-employed artist doing what you want to do and learn from their example. Again, many successful artists, some of them Many successful artists are willing to share how they got to where they are. Some of them even offer their secret sauce, their maps to success for a little bit of money as a part of making their own living. The information is out there. The understanding is out there. It can take time, but all you have to do is go get it and hang on to it. So what now? Each of these metrics of success are available as singular goals, but it's more appropriate to use them as elements of your vision, as parts of your plan, not the vision in and of themselves. You ask yourself each question and get in touch with what you want. Get in touch with what's important to you as a professional, as a creative, as a writer, as an artist. And don't do everything at once. Answer these questions one at a time. Do the work for each of these questions one at a time until you're good at it, and do the next thing. And then repeat. That's a trap we can all fall into, trying to do too many things at once and then burning ourselves out because we didn't obtain one answer at a time in due time. Now, this is my favorite part of the show, where we get to ask questions and give feedback to each other, but this segment is going to be private between you and me. I'd love to answer your questions, dear viewer. Leave them in the comments below, and we'll be in touch soon. Y'all take care.